Welcome to the ClassCast podcast, where philosophy, policy, pedagogy, and people come together in honest, purposeful conversations about improving school and education for our students and our communities. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens, an award-winning English teacher, speaker, tutor, and podcast host in Northern Virginia. You can listen and subscribe to the ClassCast podcast on all major streaming services, on YouTube, and at classcastpodcast.com. Ladies and gentlemen, class is in session. Welcome to the ClassCast podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens. This is the first episode of season 3, and we're doing something a little different. Going to start using some video to bring this to life. So if you're watching on YouTube, hey, and if you are listening, then you're not really going to notice too much difference, except you may catch a few extra ums and ahs and pauses because the video is a little harder to edit than the straight audio, but I'm going to do the best I can. So this episode is actually being recorded right at the end of June 2021, and it's going to be a few weeks before this one comes out. I got a couple other good episodes sort of lined up and things ready, but this is going to be either the first or one of the first episodes of our third season, and each season begins in July, and I have decided to record this one without a ton of additional sort of prep and planning because we just finished the first roundtable discussion of EduPodLoza. Shout out to the Unprofessional Development Podcast for setting that up. It was a great opportunity to talk with, fellow teachers and podcasters and all the rest. And we hit on some really cool ideas, especially towards the end of that first roundtable. So we're talking about how, a lot of the innovative ideas that we have about education and how to make school better are really about making school less like school. And so it seems a little paradoxical because you have teachers who are paid to be teachers who, want to keep doing their jobs, but essentially who are finding that the best and, and most interesting ways to make school better is really to make school less like school, to make school a little bit more like quote unquote the real world, right? And I hate making that distinction. I think school is the real world, and if we're treating it as something else, then we're probably doing our students a great disservice. But some of the ideas that got kicked around were really having to do with things that bordered on unschooling, right? Teaching kids how to read a map and use GPS by just sort of dropping them somewhere in town, or doing a marketing and branding sort of activity using some sneakers and lots of different discussion pieces, and having students help with writing their own curriculum or requesting special classes and things like that. All this is fantastic, right? And so I asked the question as we were getting ready to end it. And by the way, I will have the video from that segment available on YouTube. And if I can pull it, I'll pull the audio as well. And you'll have a chance to listen in to that discussion. And I may even do something special just to sort of get the end, that final piece of the discussion for people to preview or review, whatever. But one of the concerns that I had was about scale, right? So we heard all these cool, innovative ideas about things that we could do that would make school so much better, would make students so much more engaged. They'd get all these great sort of real world skills and soft skills and power skills and blah, 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 blah. And when it came down to it, all I could think was that, you have a lot of teachers who will agree that these are cool ideas, and some who will say this works for me, and some would say, well, that sounds great, but I don't think I can do that. I don't think that's going to work for me. And I think everyone in that discussion, there was a lot of nodding and agreement that some of this would work and some wouldn't, and, all this. But I said, what about scale? One of the biggest hurdles we face when we talk about innovation and progress in education today is the issue of scale. Okay. So when you adopt something new, it can't just work in your classroom. For some reason, it has to work in all the classrooms nearby. And if you're really serious about bringing on some new piece of innovation, some new pedagogy, whatever it is, it also has to work at all the other schools in your district or in your county. And then it has to work statewide, and then it's national, and everything has this concern about scale. But if you think hard about it, there aren't many pieces of educational wisdom that really work at scale that demonstrate any kind of innovation, right? The things that work at scale are very much sort of the standard. This is how school's been done for, decades, for a century or more. And we do it because it works for, most kids, or at least half of kids, most of the time, right? We have to acknowledge that school is this unbelievably utilitarian endeavor where we're trying to create sort of the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And in most cases, we're trying to do it for the least cost. And this is where people who are tough on school budgets, who want to keep taxes down, they have to reckon with this. And I'm not saying they're wrong. I don't want government waste. I don't want stupid spending. But if you really want things to be adapted to your student, to your community, if you want lessons that work for for your kids, then you have to recognize that you can't just buy a solution that works everywhere else, because it's not going to work for everyone. It's just not. Okay. Education and learning are incredibly individualized sort of endeavors. And while we can sit 25, 30 kids in my classroom and I can teach a lesson that's going to, I say reach them all, but realistically, I'll reach most of them. And hey, that might still be better than what most people are doing, but I don't think we should ever settle and say that that's good enough. I just don't think that that's a practical way to approach the situation and say, well, we got most of them, that's good enough, right? The much maligned No Child Left Behind sort of build on that idea that no child should be left behind, that this should be for everyone. We got to find things that work for all of our students. And so then we start thinking like, well, what can we take to scale? We have these standardized tests that work statewide. We have standards and initiatives that are statewide and sometimes nationwide. What can we do? And I think that part of this is going to get messy, and maybe all of it's going to be messy. But I think we have to be practical and realistic with this idea that scale is our enemy. Okay. Not that we can't try to scale things, just that when we hear a cool idea, something that worked, a group of students love this thing that happened in this teacher's classroom. And then we say, okay, well, how can we get that to be an experience for all of our students? First, you might have to give up on that. Maybe you can't. You know why? Because maybe it works with that teacher. Maybe that person delivers content well in that way, but maybe other people don't. So what are you going to do? You're going to put everybody in the one person's classroom? Hey, I've suggested it. You've heard me talk about that before on this podcast. I would love to teach in the auditorium in my high school and have 150 kids out in front of me. The trade-off is I can't grade all those essays. In fact, the trade-off of trying to really think of how to lecture and inspire discussion between that many people, I don't want to do any of the grading. So you're still going to have to hire somebody else to do the grading. You're not really going to save that much money, even if I am providing the best instruction. And there's no guarantee that I am. So okay, so if we can't practically put all these kids in that one big room, and of course, teacher with 150 kids all at the same time, multiple times a day, you're not going to create the kind of personal relationships that are really important in helping young people, especially K through 12 learn. You might be able to pull that off in college. You might be able to pull it off at the end of high school, but in most situations, education is very relational. And so when you build up class sizes, even if you have the logistics of the room and, whatever, you can staff it, you have the space for it, you have the desk for it, you can do it physically, doesn't mean you're actually doing it well, and doesn't mean that the potential benefits of having the bigger class sizes are really going to play out that way, because you're giving up a lot in terms of the personal relationships and interactions between the teachers and the students. So what do we do, right? Well, we're still hung up on this idea of scale. And what that really results in is kind of dummy proofing the classroom. And this, in my opinion, is one of the biggest problems that we face in schools today. This is not just in public schools. A lot of charter schools and private schools are going to run into the same problem, because what they're trying to do is create something that looks like a consistent product, that all of our students have this experience and get these results, right? But you have to recognize that's just not realistic. And what I'm saying might be bad marketing. Maybe you can't sell a school by saying, hey, all the kids are going to walk out of here knowing different stuff and having different experiences. But the reality is they are going to have different experiences, because they're different people, and we have different teachers, and you have different relationships with different teachers. There are different things that you like in some settings and you dislike in others. And we just have to be honest about that. So unless we're going to try to create sort of a robotic system, everyone says, oh, we're getting rid of this factory school model, this industrial model of education. We're not putting kids on conveyor belts anymore. We're not working them through on a standard timeline with this set standards and blah, blah, blah. That's a lie. That's a complete lie. That's what schools have done and will continue to do, because it's the thing that you can scale. Okay, so let's look at that metaphor of the factory school. Are we talking about craftsmanship, or are we talking about manufactured goods? We all hear the stories of, back in the old days, you buy a piece of furniture and it's handmade and it's solid and it's this and it's that, but it's slow and it is expensive and it might last generations. You might have that in your household and your family for generations and generations, but somebody paid the cost. It took some time, right? And that's not a scalable thing unless you're going to pay that many skilled craftsmen. So then what do? Well, we go to manufacturing processes where we create very good, but maybe not entirely great, say furniture in this metaphor. Because why? I can make more of it faster. I can bring the cost down. You can have it if it doesn't last more than 20 years, whatever, you can buy a new one. Because think of all the money I saved you. Think about all the time and money I saved the company in this procedure. So when people say, "Oh, we're getting rid of the industrial model of schooling," I don't buy that. I think what you're really doing is trying to make manufactured goods, manufactured students look and feel more like the handcrafted sort of stuff. And if that's not the case, well, then we've got some changes to make. Standards need to be far less specific. Okay, I'll just use English as my, since that's what I teach. English classes have fairly broad standards already, to be honest. It's all skills based. Can you process information? Can you read nonfiction or fiction? Do you know how to use certain punctuation marks, or revise certain kinds of sentences, do certain kinds of research, blah blah blah. But that's fine. You should be doing all that in an English class anyway. That's why, while I know the standards, I have the basic layout memorized, I probably don't need to, because a good class would be doing it anyway. But in a history class or a math class where things are done sort of in a linear manner, and where one lesson builds on the ones that came before, and we're building towards the ones that come after, that kind of standard procedure is going to be important, because you need to make sure that we're not skipping places, we're not spending too little or too much time different, say for history in different time periods, et cetera, or in math on different skills. It's a hard thing to balance, and so we have to be honest, we have to be realistic and say that it's not easy to individualize, those sorts of content areas or those curricula, because they require sort of this progression and procession. Now, part of the problem that they may be facing is that there are too many standards. There's too many things you're asked to cover. We are arriving at the conclusion that I think people used to believe, and then it sort of fell away with No Child Left Behind, but I think it's coming back, that depth is more important than breadth. It's more important to learn 10 important things really, really, really well than to learn 20 things at a surface level. The reality is that we have the internet, we have public libraries, we have access to information. If I need surface level knowledge on a given topic, I can get that. I can get that free of charge. Like, all I have to do is have internet or a library and the ability to read. So there isn't really like this market need for this surface level education where we learn a little bit about a ton of things. What we probably need to do is really make a curricular, like a policy level shift towards depth. What we need is students to learn a whole lot and great detail, different perspectives, all this kind of stuff about a smaller number of things. And then the teacher can reference the things that have been skipped in the timeline, say for history. In math, that's a little bit trickier, but still there are probably some details, depending on which math class, which version of math we're looking at. There's some things we can leave out. Like, I know geometry was probably the last time I was good at math, and you could have cut a couple of the pieces, because as I learn the more advanced pieces later on, I'm going to backfill. Like, there's some pieces where I'm gonna be like, well, but how does this work? And in order to understand it, I'm going to have to learn a couple of things we skipped. But any reasonable person will be able to learn that, or a teacher who is reasonably differentiating the classroom and sort of focusing in on those bigger ideas. That's where the teacher can work with a smaller group of students to teach those intermediate skills or concepts that maybe other people in the room would have figured out on their own. So anyway, all of this, I don't want to get bogged down in this. The point here is that we package our learning. We create curricula and pacing guides and all these things that essentially march everyone through the same content at approximately the same pace, with the hopes of the same or an approximately equal outcome. The reality is it doesn't work. Okay. It doesn't work, because when teachers are teaching things that they haven't created or they don't feel invested in, they don't sell it as well. Okay. Now, a good salesman can sell anything, but you sell it better when you believe in your product. And in the case, say, like in an English classroom, I can teach you any book, given appropriate time to prepare, et cetera. But There are some books I'm always going to teach better because I believe in its value, because I love it, because I think my students are going to get the most from it, because I know the kids in the room and the conversation we're going to have about it. Okay. And so when we start saying, well, everyone in the school or everyone at this grade level across the county, we all need to be teaching these texts. Maybe we all need to do it at the same time. We're going to have common planning. We're going to have common assessment. Why? Why? Is it that important to people in the community that every kid reads all the same books? I think that the people who are most concerned about efficiency and not wasting tax dollars are also the ones who on average are the most worried about, brainwashing from the schools or indoctrination of the rest. The people who say, I don't want my kid to be forced into this box to read just these books that were chosen by these people and blah, 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 are also the people who I think respect the outcomes of those individualized experiences. They might not say that, but I think that when you say every kid has to read this book or no kid is allowed to read this one, think about the voices that shout the loudest. And on average, those are people who are also concerned about scale. They're concerned about the cost efficiency and how do we keep the price down. And I think that as community members, as taxpayers, we have to recognize that these things won't always work nicely together. And a lot of what we're doing is we're dummy proofing the classroom. And I don't mean that for students. I mean that for teachers. We are creating systems in which almost any person can teach the content because it's all pre-planned. Look, we already have the curriculum. We already have this plan. We already have this test, this project, this stuff that's all ready to go. It's ready for you. All you have to do is look over it ahead of time, show up, form a relationship with your kids and teach it, right? And obviously that sounds so simple, right? But that is the situation that we're in. And with common planning comes a great deal of compromise and a lot of watering down, if we're being honest, because each teacher in the room might have something a little different they want to focus on. And everybody compromises and says, well, let's get a little bit of all those things in there. And rather than going deep on one text or concept, or rather than going deep on one point in history or one scientific concept, what do we end up with? We end up with this unit that has a little bit of all those things in it. And so while we said we were going for depth, not breadth, we're all going to plan and use this book and we're going to spend a whole month on it, or, we're going to spend 3 weeks on this biological concept and let's go in on it. Every teacher gets a say in how we're going to teach it. Every teacher gets a say in what the assessment's going to look like. We all put together the same test or the project or whatever. And the reality is we end up with this very sort of standardized approach where by its nature, it's got to sort of stay at the surface level. It's hard to go into sort of deep critical thinking when we have too many ideas to play with, or when we have too many, say, purposes on the agenda. And so why do we do it? I've already said, hey, it's about the budget and it's about blah, blah, blah. Here's what's really happening. And no one's going to say this out loud, or not enough people are going to say this out loud, but I'm going to do it. We are dummy proofing the classroom, both as a precautionary measure and as a reactive one. Okay. Reactionary thinking has led us to saying, well, we are not attracting the best and brightest young people to be teachers. And I'm not trying to, crap on young teachers. There are a lot of great young teachers. Okay. But on average, the smartest, most capable, most creative, most personable people are not going into education. They're just not. Okay. And some are. You're listening to this podcast, you're in your first few years teaching, you're like, hey, yeah. I'm not saying it's everybody. I'm just saying that in my experience, a lot of my best and brightest former students have gone on to do things where they work with people, where they require a great deal of detailed knowledge, in their area, in their content or their career field, but they're not teaching. Okay. And I would love to attract more of them, but if you're not attracting the best and the brightest, then you say, well, we're getting people who are functional, they're friendly, they care about kids, maybe they liked school, they were good at school, so we're going to bring those people in. Awesome. It's really great. But you don't trust them because you don't believe they're going to create great content. They might form great relationships. They might do a lot of things well, but you don't think they're going to be great. And so we need to create a curriculum. We need to create a pacing guide. We need to create standard classroom procedures, standard assessments, all of these things so that any idiot could be hired and do this job at least at a basic and functional level. Well, here's the thing. When you water down what you're trying to do to the point where any idiot can do it, you know who doesn't want to do it anymore? All of these people. all your smarter people. It's discouraging. Why would a person who's thoughtful, creative, who's motivated, who wants to research, who wants to learn, who wants to talk about, big ideas and all this, why would they choose a profession that is generally underrespected and in most places underpaid to show up and do work that's already pre-planned for you? People are taking the thinking out of it, and we're not far from that. The reality is, even as we make this push right towards individualized learning and personalized learning and all the rest, it's going to be something that's sort of prepackaged, where it takes the teacher out of the teacher role. The teacher becomes the facilitator. I'm now 50% guidance counselor. I'm 50% organizer and personal planner, and I'm barely there as a teacher at all. Like, my whole job is to keep you on track in terms of your content, your organization, and to form a relationship with you. And that's fine. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying that that's not what great teachers sign up to do. That's not the tendency when we say, like, hey, how do we attract the best and brightest people? We don't take the thinking out of their jobs. We want them to do more thinking. Okay, so what's the balance on this? Well, if we dummy proof the classroom to the point where the teacher has to do very little planning, then what's left? Well, common planning. Okay, but common planning without someone put in charge and a clear hierarchy requires all this sort of like weird negotiation and compromise in terms of the content and the delivery. And again, we end up with this sort of bastardized, final result that doesn't represent the best thoughts in the room. It just represents, a little bit of each of the best ideas. And so, if you want to do common planning, hey, cool. But you know what? You need someone in charge of the meeting who is not just there because they're friends with the department chair or because they're the older teacher. You want the best teacher in charge. You have to say, this person is better than the other people. And so that person gets final say in what the common plan is going to be. If you're going to do common assessment, figure out who in the room is best at assessment, and then put that person in charge of it. You can't put 5 teachers or 10 teachers sit around a table and let them all think they're equally good, because then all of them think that their input needs to be treated equally. And as a result, we get this watered down, standardized sort of thing, right? It scales, but it's not great. So what else can we do? Well, how about we slow down on mandated apps or mandated texts? You have to read or you can't read, or everyone has to use this new website or this new app. Why not? What if it works, why shouldn't everyone have to use it? Well, it doesn't necessarily work for everyone. There are plenty of apps and websites that I've adopted over the years, and I'm usually a slow adopter. To be honest, I have a rule. I do one new thing a year, sometimes 2. And usually it's because 1 I can't get by without. We got a new learning management system. I have to do it. So I'm going to try one other new thing. Maybe I'm a year or 2 behind on adopting a new piece of technology. That's fine. That means if it sucked, everyone else got to figure it out. And by the time I was getting ready to start it, everybody else has bailed and the county doesn't want to do it anymore. So that's okay. But I keep it simple, because I think, if I'm going to do something new in my classroom, I need to know that I can do it well. If it's going to fail, it's going to fail because it's not good, not because I didn't implement it well. And so when I have 5 new books or 5 new curricular pieces, or, we've got 3 new apps and this new online textbook, I can't do it all at once. I mean, I can, but I'm going to do a bad job. And in the end, because so many new things happen at once, I'm not going to have any way to track the data. I'm not going to know if it went poorly because I was underprepared, or the app itself is poor, or it didn't connect well with my students, or, it could be the crossover between the different apps and websites that these things don't work. So I don't know that mandating, the adoption of certain new technologies is going to be the key either. I think that sometimes that actually creates the problems. We say, well, if everyone teaches grammar using this website, or everyone teaches this equation, this math using this website, then so what? So we have this standard process, right? Do we get a standard outcome? Do all the kids do better? Because I can't think of a single piece of ed tech where everybody in a school implements it and every kid does better. You might find some places where most kids do better, and that's promising. Those are the ones that maybe want to hang on to, maybe want to do a little bit more with. But realistically, that doesn't happen that often. It goes really well in some teachers' classes because they push it or they use it right, or they find a way where it weaves in with what they do. And then some teachers' classrooms, it doesn't work at all. Like, all the kids do worse than they would have done previously. Why? Is it the app? Is it the students? Is it the teacher? I don't know. But we're scaling something that doesn't necessarily need to be scaled. We don't need to dummy proof the classroom if we can attract teachers that aren't dummies. Okay. So new tech, new books, new whatever, all of that's great, but those things aren't going to solve the problem. Take two carpenters, one who's great, master carpenter, and one who's sort of, novice. I'm professional, but I'm relatively new. Give them all the same tools. Are you going to get the same quality house? You're going to get the same quality custom cabinets? No, because one of them has learned over time and with experience, and one of them hasn't. It doesn't mean that the old guy's always better either. Sometimes the younger person finds this new way to use the new technology to build something wonderful. Okay. The only way we find out, though, is by letting each person do their own thing. So I'm not arguing against a curriculum that sets certain goals or certain benchmarks. I think that's fine. I'm not arguing against the availability of different apps or texts or whatever. I think that's fine. I think it's fine to have a district initiative to say, hey, we're all going to try to do this thing more or less often. That's great. But when you hand something that's sort of prepackaged or it's mandated, everybody's got to use this app to teach grammar. You're like, but maybe I teach it better than the app does. What happens there? So one of the other problems we run into with the standardization and dummy proofing is that all of the decisions are made, right, to bring the bottom up. We're trying to bring the bottom up. But what happens when you bring the bottom up by standardizing everything everyone does? You bring the top down. You have handcuffed your best teachers, your most innovative thinkers to the people at the bottom who needed the help. So what happens is you pull them up by simultaneously bringing them down. We have a more standard outcome, but it's not a better outcome, right? We bring the bottom up, we bring the top down. Hey, maybe our average improves slightly, but think about the great experiences that students missed in the best teacher's classroom. And this is one of the reasons that a lot of very good teachers have left the classroom over the last 5 to 10 years. I can remember, I was probably about 6 years into teaching, 6 or 7 years into teaching. I was at a new school at the time. And the guy in the room next door to me, he was 30, 35 years in. He was an old guy, sort of crotchety and grumpy and all that. But what he did was he connected well with his students and he challenged them. He made his class was really hard and he was really smart and he was always prepared and he always knew the answers. And when he didn't, he was good at finding them. And like the kids always thought, yeah, this guy sucks at first. And by the end of the year, almost everyone loved him. And it was this really good, like old school class. And as he was, getting ready to retire, like he told me before, he told a lot of people in the building for whatever reason, and he goes, I got to get out of here. He said, the way this is going, they're going to try to have us write a different lesson plan for every kid in the room. And after they realize that that's not going to work, they're going to write all of the lesson plans for us. And then we're just going to be here sort of playing it out with all these different kids. And essentially what he did, almost 10 years ago was he predicted the rise of personalized learning. And then he predicted the way it's going to fail and that the average teacher can't really create all these different lessons and opportunities and ways for students to demonstrate their learning and growth. And it's going to turn into this top down, well, here's the prepackaged way to personalize the learning. Each kid can pick from one of these 5 or these 8 different options. And now it's your job as the teacher just to facilitate it. And he said, this isn't good school. This isn't good education. This certainly isn't what I signed up for. And for him, I'm old enough, I'm out, right? And I thought there was some truth to it, and I kind of poo-pooed it a little bit. And the longer I teach, the more I think that he might be onto something, and I'm not talking poorly about personalized learning. I think there's a lot of ways we can target individual students better and give them better opportunities, right? I think that's a real thing. But how many people are well equipped to do that? And so what's going to happen is we're going to have this push towards personalizing learning in a way that standardizes the teacher's job in hopes of personalizing the student's job. And you're gonna have a lot of teachers who are going to check out on pieces of this. They're not going to feel inspired to go in and do great work because the work's done, right? I don't have to think. I show up, I work off a script. The kids go work in their stations or they work in their different projects. I float around the room, I help out. I mean, in a way, it's made my job easier, but it's made it far less attractive to a person who likes to think. It's made it far less attractive to a person who likes to solve problems. Now, do you want students who like to think? Do you want students who learn how to solve problems? Somebody's got to model this behavior. Okay. You can't have a teacher who does, no critical thinking, teach students critical thinking skills. The teacher who goes into every faculty meeting and smiles and nods and plays along with everything and they do whatever the administration says. I mean, maybe they're a great employee, but no piece of that has demonstrated critical thinking. They're not questioning any of it. What's the likelihood they're going to turn around in their classroom and model good critical thinking skills for their students? They're not. Okay. And that's where, as people who are curriculum developers and app developers and all the rest, they're not thinking about teachers hardly at all. They're thinking about, what do we think is a good way for students to learn? And let's do that. And that's great. That is the goal, right? Whatever works for students. But how are you going to run a school if you don't have teachers? And how are you going to run a school if you don't have good teachers? And I think that that's the problem that we're going to run into, right? So how do we get better teachers? First, we can talk about pay, but I think that, it's a chicken and an egg, right? Eggs come from chickens, chickens come from eggs. And which one comes first? If we pay better, do we get better teachers? Not immediately, but if you pay teachers better, you create the option for people who realize, I could have gone into marketing and sales, or I could have gone into, theater. I could have done whatever. I could be a biologist. I could be a researcher. People see that some money and a decent quality of life comes from teaching, and they'd say, well, that's at least an option for me now. The other piece of this then has to do with recruitment and professionalism. I don't remember anybody, it's been a while, but I don't remember anybody trying to sell me on a teaching job, trying to attract me to their district or their county by telling me that I would be trusted to do what I want in my classroom. Didn't happen. They talked about, great relationships, a positive environment. They talked about a lot of support and great materials and new ed tech and county funding and all that. Not once did somebody say, we're going to let you come in here and teach students the way you think is best, and to develop some of your own content to use in the room. I mean, I did that. I think everyone just assumes it. That should be a selling point of this job. One of the biggest selling points of the job of teacher is that you get to be creative. You get to be a problem solver. You get to engage in critical thinking. You get to think outside the box and say, what works best for these students in this room for this concept or skill, right? I shouldn't have to just use the textbook or just use this app. I have all of these resources available to me, and now I, as the professional, choose. And I need to be paid like the professional who's trusted with that decision. But I think if you look carefully at what's going on in most school systems around the country, there is not a lot of professional trust towards teachers in the classroom, particularly younger teachers. I might be at a point in my career where maybe I've earned some of that. There's a lot of other people who are in the second half of their career who can get away with doing or not doing whichever of their school initiatives, right? But what happens when you're 2 or 3 years in, you're a good young teacher and you're frustrated with these new initiatives and you're not playing along? How many extra meetings do you have? How many extra observations come your way? And then we say, well, why did these people leave the profession in the first 5 years? Why is teacher turnover as high as it is? Because you didn't create a job or a work environment that is appealing to people who really think. It's a great work environment if you like kids and you like summer off. But if we want to go beyond just someone who likes young people and likes to have their vacations in summer, like, you need to let people think. You need to let the teachers sort of demonstrate their skills and fully engage in what it is they're supposed to be doing, which is educating. So I think that one of the biggest problems that we face in terms of the quality of education that we provide today really has to do with dummy proofing. In one hand, we have upper administrators who are trying to dummy proof the curriculum and the classroom procedures because they say, we've got a lot of teachers, we're not loving the average quality of the teacher in these rooms. They're never going to say that publicly, by the way, but they're going to be like, hey, we need to do better. We can improve our test scores if more people adopt these best practices. So they do it. The problem is it makes the job less attractive to the people who could have solved that problem organically on their own. And so do we need to pay teachers? Sure. But what we really need is a higher degree of teacher autonomy. Doesn't mean there isn't a curriculum. It doesn't mean I don't meet with my peers, once every couple of weeks or whatever. And we go over the content. We make sure we're on track. I'm not arguing for teachers to function on an island and be totally, autonomous. I'm not arguing for a dictatorship in the classroom. But I think most of the innovation that we see comes from individual teachers or come from individual and small groups of teachers adopting new concepts, new apps, new technology, whatever it may be. And as soon as we see it works, then what is the question? Well, how did you do that? Could you run a session on this and then our next professional development day? Can you teach everyone else this? And next thing you know, it's not just, hey, here's a cool option. It's here's a thing you need to do. And so what do we do? Well, I don't know, pick the order. I'm not sure the solution, but if you want real innovation, if you want education that really works in the 21st century, where we're building the kind of skills that students are going to need for the jobs they're going to have, which by the way, we don't even know what they are yet, right? Like you have all these kids who are going to graduate from school who are going to have jobs that just today don't exist. When I was in high school, they were preparing us fine. I don't have any big complaints about my schooling, but I have a lot of friends today who have jobs that did not exist or did not exist in the same form 20 years ago. And so I think we need to be realistic and say, if we want to have the opportunities to prepare students for, say, the modern workforce, for the skills that they're going to need the most, then we need to allow for the differentiation, not just between students on a standardized curriculum, but we need to differentiate between teachers and between the classrooms. We need to attract the best and the brightest people who can demonstrate good soft skills, power skills, person skills, right? We need someone who can think with their students, who can create something new on the fly. And in order for that to happen, we need to hire the best available candidates. And to really have a shot at getting the best available candidates, we need to let them know that this is a job where you get to think, you get to be creative, you get to solve problems, you have a real impact, and we need to pay them accordingly. Because until the money and the decision-making lines up with that sort of philosophy, it's just not going to happen. Okay. We're going to continue hiring pretty good, but not necessarily great teachers. And then we're going to keep saying, well, why can't we get better results? What's happening? Blah, blah, blah. Then we're going to realize, well, we don't have all the best people in the room. So we need to standardize this. And so we dummy proof the classroom and we accidentally perpetuate the factory schooling model that has been in play for over 100 years in this country. If you really want things to be different, if you really want students to have great experiences, then we need to get the best teachers in the rooms. We need to hand them the best tools available. And then we need to trust their judgment in how to affect those students. And by the way, I'm not brushing off the data. I think we should keep, maybe not all, but most of the standardized tests. I think that we should have at least some common assessment across classes within a school or within a county. I think we need to figure out what works. Okay. Just because someone's confident says, hey, I'm doing this awesome new innovative thing, this is going to be great. Hey, there's no guarantee it works. And we should be accountable to it. That's what I want. Give my kids a test that I don't have to write or grade. And then tell me I can teach them any way that works for them, any way that I want that works for them, leading right up into it. And then let's compare the data. That's it. Let's see how it goes. And if I don't do as well as someone else, I'll be the first person to ask, what did you do? And I'm going to be adopting those methods because I'm a person who thinks, because I want to solve problems, because I want to get better results. Okay. But when we standardize it across the board, there isn't any opportunity for real innovation because we don't know. We don't know what could have been better because everyone did the same thing. So that's it. Anyway, I'm rambling a little bit. I'm doing a show with no notes here. We just finished that great talk on EduPodLuza, which is available on. I'm going to post a bunch of it, but also you can check out the Unprofessional Development podcast. They're going to have a bunch of this online too. The first roundtable discussion, we heard some great ideas from everybody involved, but especially Mike Yates with the Schoolish podcast and Gerardo Munoz with Two Dope Teachers podcast. The two of them really had some great ideas that sort of factored into this discussion. And I've been thinking about this for a while, so I decided, hey, let's let it fly. So I apologize for rambling a little bit, doing it with no notes and no outline today, but I really want to make sure we're all clear in this idea that you need great teachers if you want to have great schools. And if you want to redefine what a school is, that's fine. And maybe you don't need great teachers then. But I don't see any public school systems in a big hurry to tear themselves down and rebuild what they do. So if you want to have any chance of maintaining the current model or something similar to the current model, then you really need to put better people in place. And then you need to trust them to make the decisions that are best for their students on a day-to-day basis. This has been the ClassCast podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens. You can find the ClassCast podcast at classcastpodcast.com, on YouTube, and on all major streaming services. Thank you very much. Please let me know what you think. And please, please, please tell me what I got wrong. That's always the most fun part. Tell me what you disagree with so we can clean it up in a future episode. Everybody have a great day.